and I'll answer those at the end of the presentation. We've already received some questions, and I will refer to those again at the end of the presentation. Okay. Nope. All right. I think most of you will understand our investment proposition and operating strategy, but the core of the company's assets are very much focused on underlying production, which we hold in Austria, reserves and production growth from a new discovery that we made in 2022, and a world-class exploration portfolio located in the heart of Europe. We've also got value-adding complementary renewable projects. They've been placed somewhat on hold because our focus has been very much on oil and gas production and exploration, particularly after the invasion by Ukraine and what we see as substantial oil and gas shortages in Europe. A very important other part of the business is operating capability. We wouldn't be able to take our projects forward, secure farm outs, and operate our projects if we didn't have boots on the ground. And that's a very important part of our operating strategy. We've got a very active drilling program. The majority of that program is funded by farm outs, which also provides validation and risk reduction for the company's investors. As you can see, our assets are very much located in Europe. Austria is right now very much the core of our activities, primarily our oil and gas assets in the Vienna Basin, which we hold at 100%, the Anshof discovery, which we hold at 50%, and also our exploration acreage in Upper Austria, which we generally hold at 100% until we farm certain areas out. We hold assets in Italy and also Romania, but at the moment, really the focus is very much in Austria, where we see the best opportunities for us to take our projects forward aggressively. So what we have in Austria is really a great place to build a diversified business. In 2019, we broke into a 75-year duopoly, which was held by two major companies, one being OMV, the National Oil Company of Austria, and RAG, the company from which we bought our production assets, and we're also able to secure people, data, which then enabled us to secure exploration assets in Upper Austria. It's a great country to do business for a number of reasons. Other than prospectivity, we have great access to infrastructure, and we have an excellent regulatory regime under which we operate. When you compare what we're able to do in Austria, generally we're able to permit a well to be drilled within 6 months. Anshof took about 5. We just recently put in another exploration prospect, which took less than 4 months. Welchau was a bit of a disappointment, which took about 9. But if you're doing the same thing in Australia, you're generally facing about a 24-month approval process. So while we're in a country where we operate at the highest environmental standards, the actual permitting is very, very transparent and very fast by comparison to most places in the planet. Maybe Texas, you could do things faster, but I doubt it. Europe has obviously undergone real turmoil in terms of market dynamics, but as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what we did see is a very large increase in gas price, particularly in 2022, where we saw gas prices actually go to ridiculous levels. And the response to that has been some demand destruction because industries have had to just basically shut down any discretionary use of gas. But still, what we do see is gas prices around 5 times higher than, say, US gas prices, and probably twice what we see in Australia and Asia. The gas prices going forward are still very healthy. Even before the Ukraine crisis, we actually saw gas prices substantially higher than what we enjoyed in Europe. So from a gas perspective, it's a very good place still to do business. And we do expect to see elevated gas prices in Europe for some time, although we don't really rely on them. Certainly, a exploration prospect like Welchau can do very well with historical gas pricing, as do many of our other prospects. When we look at what we were able to achieve in 2023, it set us up very nicely for our activities, current activities in 2024. We were able to do a capital consolidation, which has brought us more into line with, I guess, a serious oil and gas company, which we are. We're also able to raise substantial funds. In December of last year, around 6 million of funds were raised, primarily for the funding of Welchau. And that capital came almost 50-50 between Australia and Europe. So that's really important, because what we're seeing now, given that we are essentially a European company in terms of our activities, was very strong support coming out of the UK and Europe. Production out of our Vienna Basin fields was stable. For most of the year, Anshof 3 produced under a long-term test and outperformed expectation. We had to shut the well in September because we reached our maximum limit of what we could produce under a short-term test. We're now in a situation where we've had our new permanent facilities installed, which will now allow us to recommence production from Anshof 3 in the beginning of the second quarter, and it will then be producing as a production well. We were able to complete a number of important transactions with M&D. We got about 6.6 million of funding for them to earn a 30% interest in Anshof. They also have done a transaction we announced in December, January, where they'll also contribute about 4.95 million euros to earn a 50% interest in an exploration area in ADX AT1, which is very important. And MCF Energy at the beginning of last year have contributed will contribute 2.9 million euros to earn a 25% interest in Welchau. Now, what was important was not only the transactions, but we being able to create an investment framework which allows us to create partnerships within our asset base in Austria. This is the first time it's ever been done in Austria. Generally in Austria, you had two companies that operated at 100%. So it was very important to actually get sign-off by the ministry in Austria, because it also gave farmers like M&D, who are large companies, they have about 8 billion per year of gross revenue. So they're very interested to see that the investment agreements that we agreed with them were ratified by the ministry. So that's a very important development for us going forward. On the appraisal side, we drilled the Anshof 2 appraisal well. It didn't give us exactly what we wanted, but we will be looking to drill a sidetrack well, which will give us a very good appraisal and development well. We also commenced the installation of a permanent production facility, which has the capacity to produce at much higher rates. On the exploration side, we put a lot of time and effort into getting Welchau drill ready, and happy to say that this weekend we should be commencing drilling at Welchau after a pretty extended process to get through our environmental approvals to be able to do that. We've got other near-field prospects that are now matured to drill. One of those has got an environmental clearance. We're now looking for a second, and those wells, again, subject to farm-in from M&D, and we'll be looking to drill another exploration well later on this year. And as we continue to mature and expand our exploration portfolio.
Can I just go back to appraisal?
Yes.
On Anshof 3, once this facility's established, a permanent production facility, you can crank up 3 production?
Yes, we can.
Significantly, or?
Look, we need to be careful. I mean, we produce probably at an instantaneous rate of around 140 barrels a day, but we were only able to average about 115. So we can probably take Anshof 3 production up to about 200 barrels a day. But importantly, for a sidetrack well, and future wells, that facility can probably take up to 3,000 barrels a day of capacity. Talking about our planned activities, obviously Welchau, we're drilling straight away, and then we'll follow on. We expect with an Anshof 2 well, the sidetrack, which will go up dip from the Anshof 2 location, as we mentioned earlier. Anshof permanent production facility will be ready to produce. We expect in early April. At the beginning of April, we hope actually to be commissioning that facility in the second half of March. We are working on a follow-up Anshof well, which is also part of M&D's obligation. And also we've got a further ADX AT exploration well, and that's going to be another gas well. While we're doing that, we are pursuing further oil follow-ups and further gas exploration. So the intention there is to recommence production with 2 wells and then bring in a 3rd well to take advantage of that permanent production facility. Gas exploration is probably going to be our focus on the second half of the year, with not only the drilling of Welchau, we've got near-field gas exploration that's quite substantial. And we've also got a shallow gas play that we think we'll be able to bring into exploration, which has a very attractive ability to bring on production very quickly.
Ian,
yeah.
Could you see yourself re-entering Anshof 2, even though while you're drilling Welchau, if that other rig became available, it was...
No.
That won't happen?
No. So basically, the reason, I'll explain that towards the end, but the reason that rig became available was because we wanted it to become available. Unfortunately, the rig that we were going to use has had issues, which would have taken us beyond the time window that we'd be able to use that rig. Probably that rig, the original 202 rig, would not be available until mid-March, which would push us up against restrictions on our environmental clearance. OMV really provided us with a favour to enable us to utilise that rig. So basically OMV and RED, the drilling contractor, kind of conspired to make that rig available. Otherwise, we actually would have been in trouble. So the 202 rig will continue operations. The 200 rig has been mobilised from an area next to our Vienna Basin fields, and that provided a very good solution. So we probably only lost maybe 2 or 3 days as a result of that rig. And then that rig, after the completion of Welchau, could be utilised to drill at Anshof. So what I want you to focus on is not just Welchau and Anshof. We do have some very good follow-up gas potential. You know, we don't want to be a one-trick pony. We've got 1,000 square kilometres of acreage. We've got over 20 prospects and about 190 million barrels of prospective resource across probably 3 or 4 prospects that we're very interested in. So after Welchau, you know, touch wood, Welchau will have a great result for us. But Welchau is a very large prospect. It's in an area outside the normal footprint for oil and gas exploration. Our follow-up prospects are adjacent to existing fields, adjacent to infrastructure. So they're not only exciting prospects, but also, importantly, very close to infrastructure and probably have a higher probability of success. I think what is worth noting, a BCF of gas, in Austria or in Europe is probably worth about 13 million US. So if you've got a gas prospect that's, even a 50 BCF gas prospect is, $500 million worth of gas in the ground. We love having an 800 BCF gas prospect. 30 to 50 BCF gas prospects are also very highly profitable and would seriously move the dial in terms of the value of the company. So there's a lot to play for in our portfolio. We're certainly not a one-trick pony, even though we do recognise that people do like to see big prospects and will continue to generate them. But it's also very important to be able to have the kind of meat and potatoes type opportunities that can add value very, very quickly. Now, just in relation to the Vienna Basin, we're happy to say that field continues to produce at an average of around 250 barrels of oil a day. That's very important for us to continue to keep our team together, generate new prospects, and obviously meet a lot of our costs that we have in Austria. That's a very important field, not only currently for oil and gas, but we also see a big future for those Vienna Basin fields. It's very close to infrastructure. We're connected to both oil and gas pipelines. We're also connected to the electricity grid, and that means that we're in a unique position because we own land, not only to use if you like, those Vienna Basin fields for hydrogen storage in the future, but also potentially to be able to create solar park and hydrogen generation in the future. Now, that's quite important because electricity in Austria is still very, very expensive. And we actually see solar as a potential way of offsetting the cost of power. We utilise quite a bit of power. And that may be an alternative for us in the future. Moving on to Anshof, as I mentioned earlier, we averaged about 115 barrels a day of oil over the 9 months of production. We had to shut the well in to be able to, because we'd reached the 5,000 tonnes limit. It's quite nice that in Austria, once you make a discovery, you can actually generate revenue from that discovery. In many places, you can't actually generate any revenue from a field until you've actually submitted a development plan. So we've actually now had our production facility has met the necessary standards, both environmental and safety standards. So once we get Anshof 3 back in production, it'll be actually recognised as a permanent facility, and therefore we have unlimited production from Anshof 3 and also from any new wells that are completed, such as Anshof 2, as well as future drilling. So Anshof 2 results, basically that well came in very high to prognosis. So we do realise that there was an issue in relation to our velocity modelling coming up 60 metres high. But also what we saw was much higher, if you like, net vertical thickness in reservoir. So we've got roughly 6 times the amount of reservoir that we saw in Anshof 2 versus what we had in Anshof 3. Not only is the reservoir thicker, but it's also higher quality. So the porosity is about 18% versus 12% in Anshof 3, and we see also higher permeability. So the disadvantage, obviously, where we came in below the all-water contact. We think we're very close to it. It almost looked like a residual. So the intention of the Anshof 2 sidetrack would be to go up dip, basically up dip of where Anshof 1 would have been located, and that gives us a very good potential location with much thicker reservoir, which would make a very nice production. But there's no, it was a surprise. We've had, but we wanted to make sure that whatever we do, we drill a good production well, and then we'll reassess, if you like, the location of a subsequent well. So that well planning is going on. We do intend to make a proposal to our partner M&D sort of early in March, and then that puts us in a position where we can take advantage of the of a rig that will be in the proximity after the drilling of Welchau, and that could be if you like, a continuous operation after the drilling of Welchau, where that rig is then mobilised to the Anshof location, and drilling could take place on the sidetrack. Now, once you've got your surface casing in the well, that sidetrack well would be a cost-effective well. Also, M&D has not completed their carry, so part of that well will continue the carry by M&D, and then so we hope that we'll be drilling a well that will enable us to not only recommence production from Anshof 3, but then subsequently from Anshof 2. So just talk a little bit about Welchau. There's even some new photos in here for you to see. Now, Anshof has been around for a long time. It was drilled in 1989 by the operator, previous operator OMV. I think might be part of the reason why OMV was keen to give us the rig, because it's a very important. This is a very important well, not just for us, but also for Austria. There have been 4 offset wells drilled, so it's not completely wildcat area. And as a result of these wells, we've been able to come up with new structural modelling techniques, not ourselves, but some of the if you like, the best structural geologists that we have available to us, both in Austria and also in Europe. So a lot of work's been done subsequent to the Mollin well, which obviously gave us a good place to start. It gave us the confidence that you've got gas condensate in the basin, and within 3 kilometres of us, over 400 metres of reservoir was intersected. That was confirmed reservoir, but that could be up to 900 metres. So, we are in a good place to find hydrocarbons. What we see really the key risk here is with Welchau, we're up dip from Mollin, is really the quality of the seal, because we've chased an area where we hope more deformation will give us more fracture porosity and better productivity. Having said that, Mollin produced from a relatively thin column at around 4 million standard cubic feet a day. Importantly, despite being in a limestone setting or a carbonate setting, there was low CO2 and high condensate. So we've got a high degree of confidence around the trap. The key issue is really on this is seal. And that's why we sort of put this at probably around a 20% chance of success is realistic. But that's on the basis that we have a very large column, because a large column would require a very competent seal to be able to actually trap 800 BCF of gas. But even if at the bottom end of the scale, even if you were to find 100 BCF of gas here, it is a very, very valuable. In fact, it would be one of the largest discoveries in Europe, if we found 100 BCF. I mean, 800 BCF is sort of what you go shopping for in the middle of the Carnarvon Basin, where you've got to, install a 100-kilometre pipeline. In this case, the big advantage of Welchau is it's relatively cheap. We expect to hit reservoir probably around 900 metres, and we're only 14 kilometres from a pipeline. So it means, you're looking at pipelines in the range of sort of 10 million euros versus if you're in an offshore setting for a similar resource, you'd be looking at hundreds of millions of investment for a pipeline. So that's what makes it attractive. Now, what you see here is the beautiful location that we have at Welchau. Certainly, we have a board advisor, John Begg, was over there. He went and visited the location. He couldn't believe that we'd construct such a location for an exploration well. Obviously, due to the environmental standards, we do have to have very competent locations, probably much more than you get away with in Australia. The big advantage is, to even mobilise a rig in Australia would probably cost you about 300,000 or 400,000 Aussie, probably even more. But in Austria, mobilisation costs are very, very low. But if you had to build the same location in Germany, for instance, you'd probably need 3 to 6 months to build a location like this. So we've got very competent contractors. We were able to basically build this location in 3 weeks. We were able last weekend to get a rig in exchange for the rig we were using, and within 3 or 4 days of getting confirmation from OMV, you could see the mud tanks being installed. So things happen very fast in Austria, and they happen very efficiently. Now, what you can see from that resource range is, if you like, the low case is still a very substantial, if you like, resource potential. Gaffney Klein also reviewed that. They probably had a slightly lower best technical estimate, still a very large high case. But interestingly, their low case was around 300 or 400 BCF of gas equivalent. So that's, still a very, very interesting resource potential. So we're going to drill the well down to about 1,000 metres, and then we're going to kick off where we're going to basically follow the structure. So this plan puts us at about a 28-degree incline through the reservoir. And so what we're looking to do is to not only drill through the top of the reservoir, but also drill what we refer to as duplexes, and that's where we could have repeats of shale and carbonate. So that'll take us from about 1,500 metres, probably a drill depth of somewhere between 1,500 to 1,900 metres, depending on whether those duplexes actually exist. So as I mentioned earlier, what makes Welchau very exciting is it's relatively shallow, very close to a national pipeline. What we're blessed with in Austria is great infrastructure. Essentially, Austria is a gas transit hub. Historically, what you've had is a lot of gas coming in from Russia, and then from Russia, gas going out to Italy, Germany, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Hungary. Obviously, things have changed a little bit. I mean, now we do have gas actually coming in from Germany, and that gas is usually gas from Norway. So as a result of the Ukraine crisis, we've seen probably gas from Russia diminished by about 50%. Russia supplied about 30% of Europe's gas. That's been taken up by additional gas from Norway and also additional gas coming in from LNG. So while gas prices in the US are very cheap, by the time it's liquefied, put in a ship, and then regassed, it still becomes quite expensive gas, and the gas basically gets there at about roughly the same price as gas has been sold historically in Europe. And that sort of averages somewhere between 10 to 15 US and MMBTU. And the reason I've shown that is sort of kind of compares to where US gas prices were in 2023. They're even cheaper now at the moment. So there's a large unmet demand. Basically, Austria imports about 86% of its gas. And unfortunately, that gas is still primarily coming from Russia. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, because that's quite a concern, not only for Austrians, but it's also a concern for Europeans as well. But basically what we see here, even on a low case development, we'd be looking at probably about 120 million standard cubic feet a day, about 4 years to appraise and develop. Most offshore fields, for example, usually take approximately 10. So still, it seems like a long time, but if you've got a large resource, the majority of that time would really go into planning and getting approvals to install a pipeline. So what really makes Welchau quite interesting from an economic perspective, we're in a relatively low cost environment, we're onshore, but if you compare, say, offshore UK, onshore Italy, where there are some projects going forward, without boring you with all the, if you like, the economic parameters, you're looking at a profitability index of around 6 times what we see in other jurisdictions. And that's a combination of where we are, the royalty rates that we see in Austria, and I guess the physical aspects of the project. Now, what I've got there is a quote from the Climate Protection and Energy Minister in Austria, and she was really responding to what you can see on that graph. The dark brown is the amount of gas that comes in from Russia versus other jurisdictions in Europe, either LNG and Norway. So despite, if you like, EU's obligations to diversify, there's still a significant issue. So average 2023, there was still around a 70, nearly 80% dependence on Russian gas. In fact, in December last year, there was 98% dependence. So what you would have seen is some of the gas being compensated by gas storage, because Austria has the ability to store about 10% of Europe's gas. But the alarming thing is that most of that gas that's coming in from Russia is actually coming through the Ukraine. There's actually a supply agreement to bring gas through the UK, which actually ends in October of 2024. So if that supply was to end, then I think certainly Austria would be very highly exposed. Now, what you see in Europe is countries that are close to the coast are able to bring in gas much easier through LNG, but obviously more central countries like Austria are dependent on the infrastructure network to be able to get gas into Austria. So as I mentioned earlier, it's, we love Welchau. We've worked hard on it and we're very excited by it. But we're also excited about some of the other things that we're seeing on 3D seismic. Earsdorf is a prospect we're really looking forward to drill. We see a very high chance of success. It has all the usual attributes that you see, for gas fields in terms of gas effects. It's adjacent to a field called Heidark. That's actually one of the biggest gas storage facilities in Austria. So we can see a lot of analogies, both in terms of reservoir and, if you like, seismic effects. what is exciting about something like this is that these reservoirs are very highly, the turbidite reservoirs, they're very highly productive. Hyduck can produce at around 40 or 50 million standard cubic feet a day. But also what's really nice is we're only 2 or 3 kilometres away from extensive gas infrastructure. So getting something like this into production would be something that you could do very quickly. Even a range of, sort of 10 BCF to 80 BCF is very exciting. At 10 BCF, you're looking at gas that's probably worth about 150 million euros. At the upper end of the range, you're certainly looking at things that are worth about half a billion euros. So I guess what I'm trying to say, in Europe, gas prices, unlike, say, the US, are basically still at a, if you like, energy equivalent of between 130 to 150 US a barrel. So gas is very, very exciting in Europe. We've also been able to bring in some very good knowledge that we've actually, people that we've worked with out of Australia. We've used not only the 3D seismic that we have, the processing techniques, but also AI software techniques with an international team. And what we've been able to do is actually identify some very large sort of potential that's in relatively small but relatively shallow prospects. And so essentially what we're able to see is old channels and river systems that are only around 22 million years old. That's pretty young. So these reservoirs have been drilled through. They've been drilled through by the previous operator, but I don't think they've really known what they were drilling through. Now, we see these as quite extensive within our own acreage. We've also been able to identify it in other acreage as well. So what we're looking to do is to go out and actually extend our acreage position. Already we've got 2 or 3 of these things. Some of these things we probably see as potentially joining up, being bigger prospects. But what's exciting about these things is they're about at 1,000 metres. So the way we'd like to approach these things is probably to go out and maybe drill 2 or 3 of these things, from one location. So you can then come up with something that would be, quite substantial. But we see the success, the sort of chance of success of these sorts of things are around 60 or 70%. So they're very easily identifiable, and we see that as something that's new and really interesting, something that we want to pursue short term. After drilling something like Earsdorf, we've also got some deeper plays that are sort of in the 100 to 150 BCF range that we're also doing additional seismic processing on. And these are sort of the next cabs off the rank in terms of exploration and probably farm out opportunities as well.
Hey, before you leave that, that image, is that the green box over here, or is it totally unrelated?
Yes, yes. So that is those prospects. I mean, they're typically around 1,000 metres. So but we see them elsewhere as well within our acreage. We even see them in ADX AT2 as. So I mean, ideal, and again, this could also work very well with our, if you like, our partnership arrangements, because something like this, because they're relatively cheap to drill, you could put 3 or 4 of these together and actually even offer them to private investors. So you could almost form like a unit trust, if you like, structure where people can come in and say, okay, we're going to go drill 3 or 4 wells. These things are low risk, and they can be brought into production very quickly. So obviously, we in Europe we hear a lot about transition. I think it's obviously here to stay. We hear a lot about it in Australia as well. I think the big difference in Europe is even though politicians have got a very strong environmental drive, they still can talk about gas as a transition fuel, and it's recognised as such. It's hard for that word gas to pass politicians' lips in Australia. But there, it's actually recognised that gas is required probably at least till 2030, but now the rhetoric is becoming more like 2050. So look, we see ourselves as having some great opportunities, in the renewable space to complement what we're doing with hydrocarbons because of where our assets are located, because they're close to infrastructure, and we see, depleted reservoirs as an opportunity, not only for CO2 storage, but for hydrogen storage. We also see good opportunities for geothermal in Austria. It's a huge business in Germany. In Germany, there has been, a lot of funds provided, not only by government, but also by investors for geothermal. We've got the same rocks in Austria, and we've already identified areas where we could drill a well, actually intersect oil and gas prospects and also geothermal as well. Okay, that's all I had for you today. I've got a number of questions that were submitted previously. I'd be happy to go through those. Maybe if there are any other questions, maybe we can talk about it.
There are two. One's come from Peter Strachan.
Yes.
So, any update on when Anshof reserves will be recalculated? Has the mean/best total oil column estimate been reduced by A3, or was that well targeting the P10 estimate of 26 million barrels?
Yeah. Look, we don't think it's actually smart for us to go out and revise our reserves until we've drilled the sidetrack well. Basically, everything's changed because that well, the Anshof 2 well has come up not only 60 metres higher to prognosis, which gives us the opportunity for a lot of attic oil, but as I mentioned earlier, the actual sands seen in Anshof 2, if in the oil window, are 6 times the sands in Anshof 3. So what we're actually seeing is much better reservoir as you move to the east of the structure versus what we saw in Anshof 3. So that could provide, if you like, a much better reserve scenario in terms of the 2P scenario, but it can also provide a much better scenario in terms of productivity. But we think the prudent thing to do is to revise our reserves after the drilling of Anshof 2 sidetrack 1.
The other questions come from Matthias.
Yep.
Yep. What do you think the chances are that the current Anshof well will be a success and go into production with the additional well?
Yeah, well, we certainly we've got a high degree of confidence that the updip well will go into production. We want to bring production in from Anshof 3 first because that gives us the opportunity to get the facility up and running and commissioned. Then ideally what we'd like to do is actually drill the sidetrack well and continue producing from Anshof 3. So production is very important in terms of cash flow, but also production from an Anshof 2 sidetrack well, as well as Anshof 3 on extended period, will also give us a lot more knowledge about the reserves prior to drilling a third well on the Anshof location. So yes, the schedule looks probably like we have an ability to drill that well around mid-April. If we did that, then we'd probably be able to see production from a commissioned facility in May from Anshof 2. We should see commissioned production from Anshof 3 by the end of March.
Okay, and just two more.
Yep.
Just back onto Welchau. Just regarding Welchau, when does the winter drill program have to end? And also what results are expected and will be communicated?
Yeah, obviously, we had an environmental clearance that was self-imposed, which allows us 24-hour operations up until the 31st of March. So based on our well scheduling, that'll get the well drilled and evaluated by the 31st of March. Now, we have made submissions to be able to continue other operations beyond March, but at this point in time, we don't know whether that'll be allowed. So 31st of March will certainly give us the time to drill the well, log the well, confirm we've got gas. We'll also run what we call formation samplers in the well, pressure and formation samplers, which will enable us actually to determine the quality of gas and the quality of reservoir within the well. So now, if the well was, if you like, was completed early, there is the possibility of running an open hole test, but that's probably not the ideal situation. The ideal situation, if we get what we hope to get, is that we probably come back, we case the well and do an extended production test. I mean, typically in the modern era, what we tend to do is fully evaluate a well and then come back and test it. Because the existing rig is not set up for testing, we'd have to come back with another rig to do that.
Can you do that at any time?
No, well, we could, but we're trying to. There's a little bit of semantics about, you know, when what's a 24-hour operation and what's a 12-hour operation. Now, obviously, you could test a well for 12 hours, but probably that's suboptimal. What we'd like to do, the current environmental clearances that we have is for 24-hour testing, but we would only be able to do that within 1st of October and the 31st of March.
And you've answered the last question, so that's it.
Yeah, there was some other questions that came in earlier about page 16 of the previous presentation. And really what we were talking about there in relation to modelling of the Welchau well is actually geological modelling that we've done. And we've done a lot of modelling, not only with structural experts, both from Austria and Italy, but we've also had a $600,000, if you like, it's not actually funds that are provided to us, but it's actually work that's provided to us by the University of Vienna. So the University of Vienna is doing, if you like, studies on behalf of us for Welchau, not only in terms of reservoir modelling, structural modelling, but also potential utilisation of reservoirs, not only for gas production, but also for carbon storage. So what we've introduced, what we've been working on now for probably 2 years is structural modelling, which is called section balancing. And that's just a fancy name for actually using advanced computer power to be able to actually model a basin and then recreate it. Once you've recreated it, you can actually go and calibrate that against actual geology. So because Welchau is actually quite shallow, all the, if you like, the reservoirs and the seals and everything that we're targeting Welchau, you can actually see it surface, and so you can actually test it at surface. So it's the way people used to, drill for these things in Italy and Kazakhstan, Kurdistan, where a lot of these big discoveries have been made. But it's a relatively new technique, and it's only been made available really because we've had the computer power over the last 10 years to be able to do it. So I think that's really the last one that we had.
And what does the time frame look like on Welchau in terms of hitting your target depth? And
well, we hope to start this weekend. So I'd expect we're going to. ideally, touch wood, we'll start to see gas shows probably around 15 to 20 days in.
Today.
Yeah, well, again, you know, when you're drilling in these sorts of reservoirs, we've been fairly conservative about our drill rates, so that's based on fairly conservative drill rates.
Any reservoir seal pairs in the outcrop in the shallower in the first 1,000 metres?
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's what we're relying on. Yes.
You don't advertise.
What?
You don't advertise them.
Well,
We do now.
yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that's obviously, you know, we have to see what's on the crest, and that's so we didn't like to advertise anything on Welchau because, first of all, I think we had to be conservative until we had the environmental clearance, and then obviously we are talking about very large resources, but you know, but we also have to recognise there's risk. So there'll be a lot of advertisement once we've drilled through that stuff. Yeah, but I think that's the right time.
Does it open up any more plays if it's successful?
Oh yeah, there's I mean, there's at least 5 other targets. I mean, one in fact, even the original Mollin discovery is a potential target if we have success at Welchau, because the difference is that's a 3-kilometre well. So we could actually retarget that as an appraisal well. But the cost of drilling that sort of well is probably, you know, more like 10 million euros rather than 5 million euros. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, everyone here, and everyone on the internet. Thanks for your attendance, and we look forward to providing you with a lot of good news over the coming weeks. All the best.